So again, welcome from the Center for Montessori Studies. My name is Dr. Paige Bray. I'm so thrilled to be working with colleagues from the Center for Montessori for Social Justice with the center. We had hoped to host in Hartford, and this is our next effort. So our agenda today is for me to just give this quick introduction. We had also hoped to have with us a teacher practitioner doing research work, but due to a family death, that's not happening. So we're gonna have more time with Dr. Luz, Dr. Ayize, and Dr. Murry, which I think will be great for the turnout that we have. We have Fika and Deanne and Tanisha facilitating with us. We're gonna use the chat feature to do that. We'll say more about that. Mira is presenting her work on Black Montessori pioneers from her Diversity's Family book. Dr. Angela Murry, Dr. Angela Murry, and of course Dr. Luz and Dr. Ayize are going to present on their paper from Hidden Black Voices in the History of Montessori Education. We will have a Q&A session, and we do have a survey at the end, so please keep track of where this can work better for you, but also thinking about other content you're going to want to see in the coming months. We're hoping to do at least one more session this summer, and then see how people are pacing. Okay, so
Paige, really quick, we have a message saying that people are trying to get in, but it's not allowing them because the session is full, and that might be why it's showing a 100-person cap.
Okay, that was the cap we rearranged today, so that shouldn't be happening, but let me say that people can read this slide, and do you want me to pass to you, Deanne? Or I can pass to you, Fika, and I will go troubleshoot on the backside. All right? So again, people get we've seen the clear messaging. This is really about making sure we're doing the research, which has been one of our commitments at the Center for Montessori Study and mine as well, from, with, and for the Montessori community. The panel will be helping to move that through. Can someone else pick up the PowerPoint okay if I move off to you?
Who's gonna do the PowerPoint?
Fika will, because Fika just talked.
Okay, wait, we're gonna pull it up. I can
do the PowerPoint. I can do the PowerPoint.
It's a lot to navigate, as many of you so well know over the last 4 months.
All right, so tell me where we go. So here we go. Let's just
start here. Yeah, and it should give you a good amount of time to troubleshoot while I talk about this.
Great, thank you. Awesome.
Paige, just one quick request. Can you shift from into presentation mode on the slideshow?
I was going to do that, but then it seemed to. I have a blocking feature, so hold on.
Bravo, there we go.
Yes. Better, cleaner, nicer.
And just, yeah. Just gotta, what's the word? Press the button.
Okay, so this is what's, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so as Dr. Paige was saying, my name is Fika Khan, and I am on the board of Montessori for Social Justice, as is Deanne Williams, who is moderating, and Tanisha Hale-Jones. As well as Dr. Ayize and Mira, and everybody has been on it because it's an inclusive space in which there's a lot of collaboration. And I'm really honored to be part of this today and to represent MSJ. And as we talk a little bit more, you'll kind of get a sense of what a really special idea this is, and how it is a little bit different than just a bunch of ivory tower academics telling you what they've learned. It's an opportunity for all of us to sort of collaborate in the development of praxis and pedagogy in Montessori. So, but before that, basics, because we're all Montessorians, we know we got to set the ground rules, the structure, right? The grace, courtesy, and the logistics of what we're doing. So, as Dr. Paige has said multiple times, please mute your mic. I can hear that everybody has already done that. Good job. And also, if you have to get up or eat, Deanne, then turn off your camera. Anything that you feel, any kind of movement or anything like that that might be distracting to others. At first, it will seem like this is just a presentation and you're sort of watching a video, but that really isn't. As I said, later on, it'll be revealed to you that that really isn't the overall purpose of what we're doing here today. So questions are definitely encouraged, and they're totally vital to what we're doing here. At the end of the presentations, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but then in chat, questions are going to be open to you to ask. And that's a really important part of what we're doing, as you'll see, because this isn't just about, as I said, academic folk presenting ideas to you and filling up and depositing information, right? What we're looking for is sort of collaborative dialogue and discussion that will not only prompt you to perhaps do your own research, but also perhaps inform the folk that are presenting to you today. Next slide. Which it's not in presentation mode anymore. I don't care, but I'm just letting you know it's not. Dr. Mira suggested as we were communicating that there be community guidelines, which I can't believe I didn't think of being an elementary guide myself. There should always be community guidelines. So as we sort of interact with one another today, we want to keep these 7 things in mind. Number 1, listen actively, share the space. Be mindful of your nonverbal communication. Somebody might say something that you may not necessarily agree with. Be mindful of what that kind of facial expression or that nonverbal communication will look like. The other aspect that's really important to think about is the idea of making space for those who are traditionally not included in space when it comes to conversation, particularly about academics, particularly about thought processes and praxis and procedure. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're making space for people of the global majority to be able to ask the questions first. So, and I'll tell you, I am a person of the global majority, but I also am one of those people that is always the first one to ask a question. So I myself have to do that, where I'll say, okay, I'm gonna wait until 2 questions are asked, and then I'm gonna ask my question. So if you know you're the first one, you know, if you're a Harry Potter fan, if you're Hermione Granger and your hand is about to go up, let's, you know, give it a couple of questions before you shoot your hand up in the air, so that those people who traditionally feel like they might not have space to engage in dialogue feel safe in this space to do so. The third one is to honor the experiences of other folks fully. As we, and part of what the work we're doing here is a collaborative community discussion. And that means people are going to be speaking from their own experience, right? And you may hear a story of someone else's experience and not believe it, right? There might be a gut instinct that your own experiences are in contradiction to what they're saying. But the fact of the matter is that you have no data to disprove that their truth is their truth. And so always speak from your own experiences. Thereby you will honor the experiences of other people as they speak, right? Number 4, challenge respectfully. So this isn't a space where everybody has to agree with each other, as a certain unnamed politician who said that, you know, that we are all creating an environment where there are no challenges, right? Those of us working in social justice, everyone must agree with us all the time. We have to counter that narrative and say, no, this is a space where actually it's built on respectful challenge of one another, right? We respectfully challenge one another so that we can move forward towards understanding. And so if you hear an idea or a thought that you know, you don't agree with, focus on the idea, not the person, right? This is a brave space, number 5. So true growth comes from vulnerability, from honesty about how you feel, the honesty of your own experiences. And, you know, as someone who is on the board of MSJ and had the honor to work with the board as well as to work with Dr. Page, I know that they certainly have cultivated an environment. We all have cultivated an environment where you all should feel safe. And if you do not, I believe that we are open to being taken to task about that, right? So speak fully from your heart, because he is what we're looking for. And we're looking for, again, not total and full agreement, but understanding, right? To understand one's point of view is what's really important. And number 7 is to participate. Going back to that idea of, again, you're going to see that much of
I closed the door. I told you I'm working. Goodbye.
Somebody who told somebody they were working, you're not muted, just so you know. I mean, we all love you and great, but we just heard you. and I don't know who you are, so don't even say it. You're not in anonymity. But everybody make sure that you are muted, please. Participate fully, and you'll see that this series is based on the idea of participation of the community and what it can do for our practice in the classrooms and what it can do for the development of Montessori pedagogy. The other thing is, just so you know, this series is being recorded, so that's something that we definitely want you to be aware of. I think that, I don't know, this is why I don't do well with slides. I don't remember what the next slide is. I think I'm done with community guidelines and such. Let's see what the next slide is. Okay, good. So Deanne, I'm gonna hand it off to you so you can kind of go over how questions are going to be fielded. I don't know if one of our find out who that is and go ahead and mute it. Just go through and make sure that everyone is muted. No offense, we love you and your voices are.
Just go ahead and mute. You
I
should.
get mute all. As you'll see, we're like Dr. Page already said, is that we have panelists that are going to be presenting research, and so with you how those questions can be presented to our panelists. Okay, so thanks everybody. Remember all 7 of them. There's going to be a quiz at the end. I kid. All right, Deanne,
There's going to be no quiz at the end about the rules, the guidelines. So I just wanted to pop in here really quick to let you know I'm helping to facilitate the chat function. So if you have questions as the dialogue is going through, as the presenters are speaking about their research, you can either directly message me or put it in the chat. We will be compiling those. There is right now 123 people in the Zoom call. There was, like Paige said, there was over 300 who registered. So the likelihood that we're going to get to every single person's question is very small, but we will be compiling all of them and getting answers to people as the next couple of weeks roll out. Some of that, I do know the presenters have put in some of their contact information. So if we don't get to the question, there is a possibility of reaching out to them directly, or if you do put it in the chat, we will be compiling that and helping to pass that along. But again, you can message me, just go down to the chat function. You can type in Deanne, and you can message me directly or put it in the chat, and we will be going through those as well.
Right.
And I just make sure, please, to mute your mics. There is a lot of people here, thank you. And it can get very echoey. So I think with that, we can move into our first presenter. I think it's Dr. Debs.
correct, Dr. Debs.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw your technical note. I navigate that a good bit, so I'm gonna not. I'll manage that for you. Okay.
Okay, next book.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yes. So just before we get started, is it possible to mute everyone else? Because I'm still hearing some background noise.
It is almost complete, and yes, then yes.
Great. And then can we just transition the slide back into presentation mode?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So if you advance a couple slides.
For those who just joined us, here you go.
So thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. I am so excited to be on this call. I'm so excited to see so many old friends and new friends on this call, as well as some real Black Montessori pioneers who are also joining this call. Really happy to talk with all of you about this research. And just a note too, before we get started, is there any way that as people are joining that we don't get a ding if they join the call? No?
I don't think so.
All right. That's a Zoom functionality that we need to write to them about. Today I'm going to be talking about my research process as a conversation that emerged in conversation with other scholars and also Montessori educators, and share a little bit about what I found out about Black Montessori pioneers and other Montessori pioneers from Latinx and Indigenous communities. So I wanted to start with talking about how I got involved in doing research on Black Montessori pioneers as part of my book, Diverse Families, Desirable Schools, Public Montessori in the Era of School Choice, which came out this past year with Harvard Education Press. So in 2012, I was involved with a group of parents in New Haven, Connecticut, including some who are on the call, Joan Bosson-Heenan. We had the idea to start a community-based public Montessori school in New Haven. And at that time, I was working on a sociology PhD, and I was really interested in the question of what is the role of parents in creating racially diverse public schools? How do parents contribute to that, and how do parents make that process harder through their personal choices? And my sociology thesis advisor, Fred Wary, in all of his wisdom, looked at my CV and he said, well, you're helping to start this school, and so why don't you write about that? And why don't you write about that community? And he gave me permission at that moment to combine the activist work that I've been doing outside of graduate school with the work of academic inquiry. And I felt very fortunate to continue that throughout the research process. And so as I was looking at this question of how do families from very diverse backgrounds come to public Montessori, I conducted research at 2 public Montessori schools in Hartford, and I spent a year doing observations there in classrooms and with the parent community. But I also wanted to understand the national landscape of public Montessori, and also the historical evolution of public Montessori. And so that brought me to several national Montessori conferences hosted by both AMI and AMS starting in 2013. And one of the things that I noticed at that time was that there would be a couple sessions that were about Montessori access for Black and Latinx students, but they seemed to be very few and far between. And in between those sessions, people would really just disperse. And so at one session, I got up and I said, you know, I'm starting an email list. We'll call it Montessori for Social Justice. And if you're interested, sign your name right here. And about 50 people came up to me at the end of the session. And by the next day, we had an impromptu roundtable at the AMI Congress in Portland. And then this listserv was born. And a couple months later, someone said to me, you know, you guys really should host a conference. And I was a graduate student at the time. I had a little bit of extra time. I wasn't running a school like some of you. So I thought, okay, why not do that? And so I was so fortunate to connect with Dr. Nicole Evans and Christy Huck at City Garden Montessori in March at the AMS conference. And they said to me, oh, sure, we'll host at City Garden Montessori. And so in 2014, we had the first Montessori for Social Justice unconference in St. Louis. And that, creating that event and the community that has emerged from that group has been really integral to my research process, because I have learned so much, and I've been fortunate to be in conversation with so many of you as we've gone through. And I think that has informed so much of the research process. So as I was thinking about all of these questions and working in conversation with others, I was reflecting on the fact that I had not known anything about public Montessori growing up, even though I had attended a private Montessori school in the south side of Chicago for a couple of years as a kid. And so what was the history of these schools? How did we get them? I started consulting archival resources like the AMS archive at the University of Connecticut. And there's a great collection there of public Montessorian magazines that go back to the 1980s, but I wanted to go back even further. So I was really interested in the question of how did Montessori education show up in the American public imagination over the 20th century. And so to do that, I used a newspaper archive. If you can switch to the next slide. The ProQuest newspaper archive. This is one of my favorite research sources. And so using the search term Montessori, and I think I said it from 1907 onwards, I just started reading through the archive of what were the instances of how Montessori education was showing up in the news in the United States in the 20th century. And I include a lot of the history of what I found in chapter 3 of my book, which I eventually had to stop writing because it got bigger and bigger and bigger, so much so that I was in danger of having that part take over the whole thesis. And there was a lot early on about Montessori with very elite families, a few instances of Montessori for poor students, starting in the 1960s when there were national conversations with Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. You started to see comments about Montessori having the potential to be applied to what was called at the time, quote unquote, culturally deprived children, or Montessori as a quote unquote antidote to poverty. And that was very interesting because we've seen this model before of white people applying education to communities of color, but happening in a context that's very distant from them. A prime example of this is Native American boarding schools that were really brutal tools of assimilation for Native American communities. And in fact, I learned that there were Native American Montessori classrooms at these boarding schools starting as early as 1911, and there's some really incredible photographs of those classrooms. But the white-led view of Montessori as a curative medical offering, this antidote to poverty, was soon overshadowed by this really new dynamic vision of Montessori that I also discovered in the newspaper archives. So next slide. When I got to 1968, I really couldn't believe what I found. This was from the Los Angeles Times. And here in an article were these two photographs of teacher Medhu Trivedi and school founder Hakim Jamal of Malcolm X Montessori. And I don't know about other folks, but it just totally blew my mind that there was a Malcolm X Montessori for Black students in Compton, California from 1968 to 1970. And Hakim Jamal was a really interesting and dynamic character. He was in conversation with Malcolm X and James Baldwin and writing articles for a local Black newspaper. He was fundraising for his school from students at the University of California, Irvine, and Hollywood movie stars. The actress Jean Seberg donated the school bus that's pictured on the right slide. And he spoke very explicitly about the link of Montessori and racism, that if white people wanted to support anti-racist efforts, they could do that by supporting Montessori education. And he's both a Black Montessori pioneer, but he's a complicated figure. The program relied on his charisma for sustainability and funding, but he actually was having an affair with the actress Jean Seberg, and so when his wife and his organization found out, he ended up leaving town, and his wife kept the school going for 2 more years, but then it ended up closing. But just the fact that this existed for 2 years in the late 1960s in California, the fact that the Black nationalist movement was connected to Montessori was just incredibly eye-opening to me. And so I started looking around for other folks like this. And then I also started asking educators that I was meeting with, do you know about Malcolm X Montessori? Have you heard of Hakeem Jamal? And people kept saying, no, never heard of this. And so next slide. Another person that I discovered in the course of doing research and through articles in the New York Amsterdam News was Rosalind Williams. And some of the people who worked with Rosalind, including Meryl Thompson and Sylvia Townsend, are on this call. So I'm so happy that you're here. Rosalind Williams discovered Montessori as a parent through the New York City School Integration Project that was busing Harlem children to the suburbs. And when the funding ended several years later, she created CHAMP, the Central Harlem Association of Montessori Parents. And so CHAMP ran a Montessori program in Harlem in a couple different locations. And even more significantly, they created a teacher training program, which ultimately received AMS certification in I believe it was the 1980s, and was the first Black-led Montessori teacher training program in the country. Next slide. And another person that I learned of working roughly the same period in Boston was May Arlene Godpie. And I think of these as using the metaphor from the film Hidden Figures, of the idea of hidden figures that have been hiding in plain sight, because these educators were being written about in the biggest newspapers in our country. But again and again, when I've asked Montessori educators, do you know about these folks? People have said, no, I've never heard of them. Hopefully this is starting to change now, and today's conversation is an opportunity to change that. So May Arlene Godpie was a former Catholic nun who discovered Montessori through the Catholic community. She actually trained with the AMS founder, Nancy McCormick Rambush. And she ultimately created the Montessori Family School in Roxbury. She got funding from the Ford Foundation. She had profiles in the Boston Globe magazine. You know, her school was serving Black families in Roxbury, and she had this vision to create a Black utopian community with 160 houses centered on a birth to 18 Montessori school in the center. And she actually partnered with the famous architect Buckminster Fuller, the person who was doing all of those geodesic domes in the 1960s. And so he agreed to create the design for her for free. We'll get Dr. Luz talking a little bit more about what she's found out in the Buckminster Fuller archives. But you know, it was incredible to me that they had this vision, they had a plan, and all that they needed was $4 million to make it happen. And she held fundraiser after fundraiser. She and her students wrote a student opera that they put on at the New England Conservatory. They had an African fashion show. She raised money to take the children to Africa to learn about their heritage. She was doing all of this incredible stuff, and I think she was in her 70s and 80s while she was still operating the school. So an incredible amount of energy, but she was never able to raise the money to make this vision a reality. And both she and Rosalind Williams were constantly scrounging for the cash to keep their schools open. And they are representative of, you know, the kind of institutional racism that Black Montessori pioneers have encountered in trying to access capital to establish, institutionalize, and expand their schools. And we see that disparity today as we look at the private Montessoris that have flourished and expanded, that were founded at that time by white Montessorians who were able to access the capital. So there is a historical legacy and debt that we see there. Next slide. Our conversation today is focusing on Black Montessori pioneers, but I also want to just briefly mention that I talk about Latinx and Indigenous Montessori pioneers, several key folks, Martha Uriosty, who was one of the co-plaintiffs on the school desegregation case in Denver. She was a Denver educator who created the first public Montessori school in Denver and led to the flourishing of public Montessori in Denver. Dina Pollock, a Latinx educator in Dallas, who completely of her own accord created a Montessori classroom, and then that ultimately led to Montessori schools in Dallas. And the Southern Utah Montessori Head Start, which opened in 1965 and is still operational today. So there are lots and lots of instances of Latinx educators, Indigenous educators, and Black educators who founded public Montessori programs that became robust citywide networks of multiple public Montessori schools. And there were also Black and Latinx and Indigenous parents who led desegregation efforts in many cities around the country, including Milwaukee, Cleveland, Dallas, and elsewhere. Next slide. So what do these stories tell us? They tell us that Black ancestors claimed Montessori as their own. And in their framing, Montessori was a form of cultural empowerment and anti-racism desperately needed for their children's affirmation and survival. It was not a narrative of white benevolence in providing Montessori to communities of color, but communities of color demanding options for their children, including Montessori. This also complicates the representation of no excuses charter schools today as being somehow culturally aligned with Black communities. There's really important communal work happening right now on Instagram with some of the Black at accounts like Black at Success, Black at Uncommon, where students and alumni and teachers from these schools are talking about the racist disciplinary and other experiences that they've gone through. And so I think it's really important alongside that conversation to assert the long history of Black progressive education, and that there are other models that we can look to the past for to inform the present. And I think finally, as we train the next generation of teachers, as we share about Montessori to the broader public, we can't afford to not know this history. And I included the image of the iceberg here because I really felt as I was doing research that this was just the tip of the iceberg and that these stories were only a small fraction of the other stories left to be told. Next slide. So what kind of action can all of you take as interested participants on this call? So first I would say it's, as we're doing the work first to learn the history of race and racism in our country, it's really important to learn the history of Montessori and race and demand that it is included in educator training and professional development. I specifically wrote my book with an eye to it being used and shared with Montessori teachers and Montessori teachers in training. And so I really hope that it will be useful for you. I would ask national Montessori organizations how they are honoring Montessori pioneers of the global majority, what kind of work they are doing to commemorate the people who have made significant contributions. And I was really delighted that AMS was giving an award to Ana Maria Garcia from Puerto Rico this year, but that was that ceremony was unfortunately suspended when the conference had to be canceled. So I hope there will be another opportunity to honor her and her work. As we think about the lack of funding that has happened in the past, there's an opportunity to support funding Montessori educators of the global majority today, both through national organizations, but also through startup projects. Dr. Ayize just recently launched a Black Montessori Educators Fund, and please correct me if I have the wording wrong on that. So that's an opportunity to make sure that Black Montessori educators in the future have the access to the funds that they need. And and with regards to the iceberg, all of you can begin to collect the oral histories from pioneers in your community. And so I've included an interview template that feel free to adapt and modify that you can use to start conducting conversations with folks in your community. And one of the things that Dr. Page and I have talked about is our hope that at some point we can create an archive, perhaps at the Center for Montessori Research, that would be a place to house interviews of Montessori pioneers. So those are the things that I wanted to talk about. And one of the things that has been so delightful about this conversation is the opportunity to learn further from my friends, Dr. Ayize, Dr. Angela, and Dr. Luz, who have, in a sense, picked up the thread from some of these conversations and delved deeper into the archives to find out more about Black Montessori pioneers. So let me turn things over to them. Thank you.
It looks like my contact information is not in there, so I'm happy to provide that. I'm Angela Murry, and I'm at the University of Kansas. So my email address, you can search for me on the university's website, or it's akmurry@ku.edu, and I'm happy for any follow-up inquiries that anyone might have. So I have been asked to sort of introduce this project that I collaborated with. Thank you, Deanne, for putting that in chat. My email address is in the chat. So this was an opportunity, as Mira alluded to, that to really pick up on the thread of her work. Mira and I go way back, and I was fascinated with her work, and the more I learned about the pioneers in Montessori education and the way they were really using Montessori as a tool of empowerment within their communities was really fascinating for me. So I sort of put that in the back of my mind, and then an opportunity, a really great opportunity, just sort of arose, one of those perfect coincidences. So you can go to the next slide if you don't mind. So I have a colleague who is the president now, but was the vice president of the Organization of Educational Historians. And she and I, we happened to both have daughters dancing at the Kansas City Ballet School, and got to know one another and learned of our common interest in education. And she was telling me about the conference that they had planned in 2019, and it was the theme of the conference was Lift Every Voice, and it really had that notion of elevating those hidden figures in history. And so that conference was actually held in Kansas City, which is local for me. And so as we talked about it, it just seemed like a perfect opportunity to really not only provide another venue for these stories, but really to share these stories outside of the Montessori community. This Organization of Educational Historians conference involves education professionals and historians who have very little knowledge of Montessori, and what they do have is sometimes sort of misunderstood. And so this seemed like a great opportunity to not only talk about Montessori, but also dispel some of the myths about Montessori. And so that was really the impetus behind this, was reaching out to Luz and saying, hey, we have this great opportunity. Let's build on some of the work that we've been hearing about in the field, and let's participate in this, this small conference, but one that presents an opportunity. And then after our paper presentation at that conference, the organizers of that Organization of Educational Historians suggested that we build that paper into an article for their publication. And so coming up next month, we have the work that we're talking about tonight, which is an article in the American Education History Journal that highlights the stories of 3 of these individuals. And I very much agree with Mira that the more I learn, the more I learned that there was to find out about these stories. So I'm really hoping that this can not only be a reference and a resource for people in a peer-reviewed journal who are interested in Montessori, but I also think that this can become a resource that serves the broader education community, and that's one of the things I always look for, those opportunities to try to bring Montessori into the larger conversation about education, and this seemed like a great opportunity to do that. So yeah, so I think that's just a little bit about where this project started, and I'll turn it over to Luz and Ayize to build on that.
So, hello everyone. I'm so glad to see you all here, and I'm so honored to talk about what following the thread. So part of what we're talking about today is how you can see yourself as a researcher. Research is often done to communities and extracted from communities. So this is our way of starting a conversation of what one type of research could be. So a lot of times people think about research in the educational setting as action research. So what do I do in my classroom and how do I study it? This is another avenue, which is to follow the historical roots of Montessori and of Montessorians of the global majority. So more of a history, oral history track of research, which is not normally something I do. So this is very exciting for me. So Dr. Murry and I presented at the OEH, and the first thing we wanted to do was to amplify who Montessori is and what Montessori is in the US. If you have, any of you who are working in Montessori know that when Montessori is spoken of, it's spoken of as primary only, or infant, toddler, and primary. So we wanted to really talk about who Dr. Montessori was, her method and practice, and how there were two phases of Montessori history, from Dr. Montessori coming to the U.S. at the San Francisco International Exposition, and how there were attacks on Montessori education, and then it resurfaced in the late 1950s after her death. So that was the first part of the talk, and we can go to the next slide. The next thing that we talked about were, this particular presentation actually was focused on Montessorians of the global majority. I'm going to speak on May Arlene Gadpai, who Dr. Mir Debs talked about, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what I discovered about her, and also Kutsia Roston, who is a Montessorian of Northern Indian descent, who actually spent 2 years traveling around India with Dr. Montessori and Mario Montessori, and also her own family. So I'll talk about May Arlene Gadpai and also Kutsia Roston, and then I'll hand it back to Dr. Murry. So my work in studying May Arlene was just a revelation in Black female power. And I think I've heard it over and over again, but it was more exemplified to me than ever, that when you want to see movement and you want to see change, look to Black women. So she was a force to be reckoned with. She actually testified in the hearings on poverty, calling out the concept of poverty as something that people suffer versus poverty as something that is done to communities. So to me, that was one of the first times that poverty was called out as a system of oppression. She did not use those terms, but she talked about it in a system. She was able to gather national recognition for her work, and as Dr. Debs was talking about, she was actually able to enlist the help of Buckminster Fuller, who not only created architectural sketches for this 165 home community. There's a plan about how to sustain the life cycle of students from birth until 18, and how these homes would be free to Black families in the Roxbury community, and that they would cycle through as the children turned 18. She had this beautiful plan of open air, beautiful homes, a center of town, not just the school, but with opportunities for Black-owned businesses. So this really was a new type of society that she wanted to realize. She never did anything, just a little bit. So She actually, during a time when she was convalescing from having a heart attack, she actually wrote a 200-page document that she called her thesis. She was not in graduate school, but decided to write what she called a thesis. And the idea of this thesis was to get out the word of what Montessori could do to liberate Black people in the United States. Within this, and what was most exciting for me as I followed the breadcrumbs, was to see this thesis, hold it in my hands, and see that she had a section about reparations, which again, I don't know was happening at that time. She also had grace and courtesy lessons about racial identity. So she had lessons for white children about what it means to be white in America, and she had lessons for Black children about how to be uplifted and be honored by who they were in a community that didn't honor them. So this is really amazing lesson by lesson resources. At the time, I was able to find these right before the shelter in place. So I haven't been able to order the whole thesis. It's quite lengthy, but that's my next thing to learn a little bit more about her. The other Montessorian that I focused on was Johnston, who again spent 2 years traveling with Dr. Montessori as a young child. Her mother was so interested in Montessori and so invested in her children that she decided to pick the family up and to move around India with Dr. Montessori. Kutsia went on to immigrate to California and actually opened her own training center. And that's a very interesting training center because there's only one level and it's 2 years to 12 years. So she really believed in having the entire span so that there's no breaking up of the levels as we see now. She was actually asked by Mario Montessori, and this is one of the letters that we can see in the public record. He asked her to start this training program. So she's sort of a direct contact with Dr. Montessori in Southern California. Really fascinating woman. I was not able to, what I wanted to do is to interview her for our article and wasn't able to do that. So Dr. Murry, will you please speak on Rose Butler Brown?
I'm still muted. Let me pull up my notes. I wasn't expecting to be the one talking about her, but I can certainly do that. So Rose Butler Brown was somebody that we included in our original paper, but we really weren't. We had her included in the article as well, but based on the length of the piece and the recommendations of the editors, they suggested that we focus on the 3 individuals that we did focus on. So we had a little bit of information about her from the paper, and so let me pull that up, and I am happy to share some of that with you. So Rose Butler Brown was someone who she was someone who was sort of not completely immersed in the Montessori community. She had a role in Montessori entering the Black normal schools of the day, rather than being someone who was necessarily a Montessori. She didn't open a Montessori school or a training center. She was an educational pioneer in her own right. She was a civil rights activist. She was the first Black woman to earn an educational doctorate from Harvard. She wrote the first doctoral dissertation by a Black woman in education that used the term evaluation. So she was certainly a cutting-edge individual. Interestingly, she was involved in training educators, but not necessarily training Montessori educators. And she refused to send her students to practice in West Virginia because of the differential salaries for Black teachers in that area. There is today the Rose Butler Brown Peer Mentoring Program at the University of Rhode Island. And so she had an interesting role in connecting to the broader field of education. Her connection to Montessori was that she suggested that Montessori education could address Black students' lagging scores in reading proficiency. And what she did is she adapted Montessori's reading pedagogy using tactile surfaces. So she used the idea of the sandpaper letters as a way of addressing reading challenges. She had a lengthy teaching career in historically Black colleges, and her teaching, while not a Montessori teacher preparation program, was strongly influenced by Montessori education. So that, again, she is one of those people in the history that presents a great opportunity for further research, and what I hope is that these kinds of conversations can lead to folks doing additional exploration of her story, because I'm sure we just scratched the surface.
Next slide. So now Dr. Ayize is going to talk about his work in the article.
Peace. Can everyone hear me all right? All right. So I thank God for life, strength, and health. I thank God for each one of you not thinking it robbery to join us. And, again, want to thank all of the folk who helped behind the scenes to get it organized. MSJ, you all, we rock. So I'm blessed to be in the midst. Dr. Page and, CMS, tremendous. Thank you so much. And thank you to the presenters before me, Dr. Mira, Dr. Luce, Dr. Murry. You all dropped the mic, so I got a brother looking good. So I'm good. So I'm blessed to talk about Lenore Gertrude Briggs, and I first want to start with When and Where I Enter. I think is a great book that Paula Giddens wrote many years ago, and so I enter because Dr. Mira Dibbs put the hook on me, and she was working on her book Diverse Families, Desirable Schools, and so I would say if you haven't picked that book up, you would want to pick it up. It is a great book. In fact, I got my copy right here. It's a great book. And as Dr. Mira was doing the research on it, she, as she already presented, she unearthed some unsung heroes, as she calls them, hidden figures. And she was going to be presenting at the AMS conference, which that year was going to be in DC. And so she said, well, why don't I go ahead and look to do a presentation that features some Black trailblazers in the Montessori arena when I'm in. And so there you see myself, my wife, Sister Mama Willa Golden, and Sister Juanita were all featured because we all were involved in helping to start Montessori programs in the, we call it the DMV, Maryland, Virginia. And based on that panel, the panel was so successful that Dr. Mira said, oh, well, you should continue doing that type of featuring, pioneering Black Montessorians, at the MSJ conference. And so fast forward to that summer, I forget, don't give me to lying on the exact year, but we did a panel at MSJ. And again, the panel was really successful. You will see right there. Oh, I see a 2019. All right. Yeah, helping a brother out. Thank you. So we did the panel there at the MSJ conference 2019. And again, it was a huge success. So much so that I was approached. Now I saw Brother David on the line. David Ayers of Montessori Public said, wow, that was really impressive. Would you be interested in writing, something up about it? And I said, to write about you know, some luminaries, folk who were doing great work. And on that panel at MSJ, you know, you see the individuals featured there, and I'm blessed. You know, I saw Sister Sylvia Townsend is on the line. That's another phenomenal Black Montessorian. You know, Jackie Miller is on the line, another phenomenal Black Montessorian. I saw, you know, Sister Merrill Thompson on the line, another phenomenal Black Montessorian. And so they were featured. We also had Professor Grimstead was on the panel. So it was featured in Montessori Public. And so that's how I entered. I got roped in by Dr. Mira, and I'm kicking and screaming because I was so blessed. Like, thank you, Lord. All right, next slide. So I was asked to do a piece on, so based on the research that I was doing from the panel and actually writing up for the article, I was really fascinated by the stories of these Black Montessori luminaries that I had a chance to come across. And so, you know, I told Dr. Mira, the stories are so fascinating that I would love to one day write a book just on these Black Montessorians. And, you know, all you need to do is tell Dr. Mira, you know, you think about doing something and it's done, right? And so Dr. Mira put me in contact with Dr. Murry and Dr. Luz, who were working on, you know, their work that they had already presented. And they said, well, would you be interested in, you know, telling one of those individual stories? And as a student of history, I said, oh, telling stories is what I love to do. And so I was able, and it really just hit me to tell the story of Lenore Gertrude Briggs, because I was blessed to have one of her children right there on the panel. And so who better to get a story about a phenomenal Black Montessorian than from another phenomenal Black Montessorian, and hear from one of her children about what impact she made. And so just as Dr. Mira said, she was also using Montessori as a source of empowerment for her Black community right there in Crooklyn. Oh, excuse me, I'm on. It's got to be professional. In Brooklyn, she used Montessori as a source of empowerment. So Lenore Gertrude Briggs, she was born in Grenada. In fact, in St. David's section of Grenada. She came, and before she even came to the U.S., she already was a teacher from an early age in Grenada. She came to the U.S. in 1965. She early on became involved in, you know, working diligently. She had 6 children, and so she worked 2 jobs. She worked as a domestic early on, and in fact, you know, Merrill tells the story of her mom left her papers on the table of the house that she was working as a domestic, and they found her teaching credentials on the table, and then they told her, oh, no, you're a teacher, you can't be working here as a domestic. No, you gotta go. And so they sponsored her to become a teacher there in New York. She became a Catholic teacher, and she still worked 2 jobs. She was teaching at the Catholic school and then working, I think Merrill said, a 4 to midnight shift. And she did that for a number of years. And then her mom got involved in a multi-level marketing program where she actually earned a good amount of money. This was like in 1971, but the multi-level marketing business collapsed in 1973, and the mom had to make a decision. You know, as Merrill tells the story, you know, her mom was broke at that point, didn't have a job, had a bunch of mouths to feed. And so her mom, and I was actually, you know, my time was short, so I didn't put the clip in there. I was gonna, you know, put it in, but I ran out of time. But she says her mom made a decision. She said, well, I'm gonna go in the room, and when I come out, I'm gonna know what I'm gonna do. So the mom just went in the room and decided, I'm gonna open up a childcare business. I'm gonna open up, a babysitting business. So the mom opens up the babysitting business in 1973. She opens up with 1 child before the year is even out, because of the mother's nurturing and caring. They, you know, many folk called her mom because she was almost like those children's mom. And literally before the year is out, she had grown by, you know, not even 100%. I guess that's like 1,000% growth. She had double-digit children by the end of the first year. So the mom had to expand the child care program from that one room, had to enclose the porch in the back, and the program continued to grow. As this program, and you know, in the Black community, they say that the drum is like the mouth is like the drum in the Black community. So word of mouth got out there that mom was doing such a great job. The program continued to grow, and as it expanded, mom actually had the and again, you know, she was in Brooklyn, so I don't want to speculate too much. I don't want to say it was Becky or it was Karen or, you know, Connie that called the authorities on mom, but they called the authorities on mom and said she was running an unlicensed child care center out of her home. And the mom, when I guess they called the fire department came to the door. Meryl tells the story of mom being so excited about, you know, the work she was doing with the children. She invited the fire department in. The fire department is there to close her down. She invites them in and says, "Oh yes, let me show you what we're doing in here, working with your children on this, we're working with your children." And I guess the guy must have been so impressed that he said, "All right, well, we're not going to shut you down, but just get legal, get your stuff in order." So she then takes that opportunity to go ahead and works on becoming legal, and she actually goes ahead and puts a down payment on a building around the corner, which she then did get legal at that space. And while she was working to continue to expand her program, she then also enrolls at HBCU, Medgar Evers, and she obtains her early childhood development bachelor's in '83. And, you know, at this time now, as she moved around the corner, it was called Mom Center for Early Childhood Development. As time goes on, mom continues to do a great job nurturing the children. The program continues to grow, and she heard of an opportunity to gain her master's degree. And now I need to back up for a moment. When she was in Grenada, again, she already was an educator, and she actually read and learned about Dr. Montessori there in Grenada. And so she already had her interest pricked because of what she read around Dr. Montessori. And so she decided, when this opportunity came about, to earn a master's degree and get your Montessori certification at NYU. This was a program headed up by Dr. Merlina Barron at NYU. I hear the phone in the background. So she goes ahead, she jumps on the opportunity. She is in the first graduating class of this Montessori program at NYU. And immediately after getting her certification in '89, she changes the name of her program to Lefferts Garden Montessori. And again, you see she is, trailblazing in that she is. So some might say, you know, in the paper that you see there in the Caribbean Life, I think it says the first Black Montessori school in Brooklyn. I wasn't able to verify that. So I say one of the first Black Montessori programs there in Brooklyn. And not only was she able to make individual impact upon the children, you know, she had a number of individuals who actually went through her program as students who later grew up to become teachers and work at the school. So to see, you know, individuals growing and developing and coming full circle was tremendous. The letter that you see there is from one of the parents. He actually was working with the parent group, and in the letter you see he's writing this to a famous radio program in New York. I think it was WBAI, and he's trying to convince the radio DJ to do an interview of Ms. Briggs because what she was so phenomenal. In fact, what he says there, he says, her efforts with the school have been extremely successful, say I even triumphant. all of the students who attend this school demonstrate an amazing mastery of language and numeracy with a reasonable foundation, excuse me, a remarkable foundation. Oh, Paige, can you go back? I was just reading that slide. With a remarkable foundation in the other subjects and areas throughout, learning about Africanity. And he talks about how the students were doing numeracy in the thousands, even in the early childhood level. And based upon, in fact, I think he even says here, when a 4-year-old understands numeracy into the thousands, this is truly wonderful. And so again, this is a parent trying to persuade the radio DJ to do an interview. He was so persuasive, the DJ does an interview, again, just to spread the information about how impressive, how life-changing for many of the individuals Ms. Briggs's work was. I also had a chance to not only read some of these documents, I also had a chance to interview some of the parents. I interviewed one parent, and if I'm not mistaken, this parent traveled miles and miles and miles to go ahead and bring his child to Lefferts Garden Montessori. This parent, if I'm not mistaken, there were parents who lived in Long Island who would travel all the way to Brooklyn. So if you don't know New York, that is easily 20, 30 miles just to bring his child to go to this program that was making a difference. And I say a community impact because Miss Lenore Gertrude Briggs would often take in folk from the community. So not only is her school nurturing many, by the time she first starts, again, her educational program with just a handful of children. By the time she finishes, she almost has double-digit numbers of children. She has, over 70 children in the program. The program is still in existence today. Her son is running the program. There are over 100 children in the program. But when I say community impact, she would take in individuals from, the community who might have been going through difficulties. And in fact, I'm gonna play this, and I'll take my lumps later on. Folks will tell me I should have put it in the slide presentation, but I'm gonna play this, and you all tell me if you can hear it. Comforting parents. You said emotional accommodations, economic accommodations. Can you paint a picture of any of those? Give me a story around any of those.
Okay, I will. So one of the parents suffered domestic abuse.
Okay.
And mom had to live at the house until she was able to get on her feet again.
Yeah.
And when she was ready to buy a house, mom gave her the money for her down payment.
Whoa.
And when she was going to pay mom back, mom told her no.
All right, so I see my time is running short. So not only is, and again, that was Meryl, who is on this line right now talking about her mom, and one of the parents who were going through domestic violence. The mom told this parent, move in so that you could get yourself together, and then even help that parent by giving them the down payment so that she could have bought her own home. And so that's the type of community impact that Miss Lenore Gertrude Briggs was making. And again, I could go on. I'm going to cut it short and just say that from what I had a chance to learn, I realized that, if you are interested in making a difference in your community, you would do well to learn from Lenore Gertrude Briggs. Take a page out of her book. She had a dogged determination. She would, as I was talking with Meryl, we talked about, her mom almost being like unstoppable. She had, she was, a force of nature. She also sacrificed not only her own, really her own life to do well while doing well. So she actually was able to buy 2 buildings right there in Brooklyn where the school is, prospering right now. And so she was able to do well while serving the community. And the last thing that I would say was, she was able to go ahead and use a spiritually grounded care and pursuit of excellence to help those Black children to really excel and do well. And I think that we would do well, again, to learn from Miss Lenore Gertrude Briggs, because there are many opportunities for us to ground our young folk in some of the spiritual principles that are inherent within the Montessori method, but oftentimes we focus on the academic. But again, by nurturing some of the, in fact, I think it was talking with the parent, he talked of how Mrs. Briggs used to do a meditation with the children. Every day they would come in and do a centering meditation. And in fact, he recited some of the, but my time is up. Let me zip my lip. Again, I was greatly inspired by her story. And again, I hope that we might have some more time to share in days to come about some other phenomenal Black Montessorians. Thank you all so much. Woo!
So does that wrap up the presentation, the slide presentations for your article, Dr. Angela? Or is there more? Can we move?
No,
We're on the question and answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could just say on the last slide, Dr. Page, if you go back for 1 second, and right there in 2017, because of the impact of her work, she had a street named after her right there in Brooklyn, and that's the street that you see there, and it was written up in the Caribbean Life for those folk who want to read more. So now I think we can go into Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Ayize. Thank you, Dr. Luz, Dr. Angela, Dr. Mira. That was really great. Dr. Ayize is a great storyteller. One day he'll tell you stories about plantain chips and how he had to park my car in St. Louis, and that's a great little story. So our researchers have given you some presentations here, and I think we're gonna sort of, I want you to stick around because we really want to sort of drive home the point of all of this, and we're slowly going to get to the point. But I do want to start off with, Deanne and myself, we've been helping the logistical framework of this, and I'm going to tell you all, being on a call with these very, very smart researchers can be really, really overwhelming and so fulfilling at the same time. And there were a couple of words that they'd be talking and I'd have to be Googling over in the corner to be like, what does praxis mean? And so I'm going to tell you, we're going to come up with, some of these words are going to be said like praxis and pedagogy. And basically that just means praxis is the practical application of the values and the philosophies of the educational paradigm that you're working in, right? And pedagogy is basically the method and the practice of your teaching. So I do want to start off with Dr. Mira and ask her some questions. One of the things that, as I read over your work and as I listened to your presentation right now, that was mind-blowing to me is the connection between the Black Panther, Black nationalist movement and Montessori. I am a huge, huge, huge fan and student of Malcolm X. I am trained as a historian in memory after the Civil War and racial the racial climate of the US and how Black folk have pushed up against the sort of overall hegemony of white supremacist culture. And I never knew about Malcolm X Montessori, never heard of it. And so that's kind of interesting to me to have done graduate work in that field and never have even come up against that. And so I know now from your research that as early as the 1960s, this has been being used as liberatory practice. And in chapter 3 of Diverse Families in Desirable Schools, you use this term, culturally responsive Montessori. And I'm assuming that term is sort of directly related to the idea of empowerment. Can you talk to us a little bit about what culturally responsive Montessori means, particularly in the context that you wrote about it? She's still there?
Okay, I'm unmuting myself. So this is a moment of, we've talked about having this be a Freirean dialogue, and you asked a wonderful question about culturally responsive Montessori, but there's a call emerging from the chat section to really create space right now for Black Montessori educators on this call to share experiences. I'd like especially to open up the call for some of the pioneers who we have joining us, including Sylvia Townsend and Lenore Briggs's children. There's so much happening in the chat box right now that I'm trying to stay. Meryl Thompson, thank you for helping me out there. So I'd love to open up the space if there are things that they want to share. And I think another piece too, in terms of culturally responsive Montessori, is also to hear from people who are in the process of trying to birth their own schools. So one of the people that I wanted to highlight, and I see this coming in the chat box, is Amelia Sherwood is creating an Afrocentric school called Sankofa Learning Center here in New Haven. We're so fortunate about that. I also want to highlight Trisha Mokino's work with the Caris Children's Learning Center and the Indigenous Montessori Institute in the Cochiti Pueblo in New Mexico. So I'm going to stop talking right now, and I'd love to turn things over to some of those folks if they want to speak.
If they can address that, because both of the folks that you just named are really definitively creating that sort of culturally responsive Montessori. So that would be great if they could speak to that as well. Just start off with Amelia, maybe, and then Trisha. Or actually, let's highlight our elder first. This is on you, Deanne. I can't see so many people here right now.
I know there's 6 pages of people.
Why don't you go ahead?
I'm gonna call it. I don't know if Sister Meryl wants to say anything about culturally responsive, pedagogy in a Montessori environment, or if Sister Sylvia, I'm gonna call folk out by name, want to say anything.
Let's do that. And if you defer, then you can defer. Yeah, sure. But Deanne will need to do the unmuting or the.
I'll look you up.
Okay, so my name is Meryl Thompson. Lenore Briggs is 4th child. My brothers are also here, Ross Whiteman and Andre Whiteman, and my husband Lamar is sitting right next to me here. Thank you so much. Thank you for honoring my mom. She is no longer with us. She died in 2015. At the time she started the school, it was an all-Black school. That was the neighborhood. People came from the neighborhood and from, as you said, as far as Long Island. So in terms of creating a culturally responsive school, she actually worked towards the individual nature of the child, was very caring about their individuality, as Dr. Montessori says. And there were many Black historians that they learned about also during that process. But she actually channeled it through the meditative process, through their meditation and things like that, to learn about themselves. I love myself the way I am. I don't know if you're familiar with that song, but that was a song that was played for them during their meditation. That was the first thing they heard, was I love myself the way I am. There's nothing I need to change. I'll always be the perfect me. There's nothing to rearrange. I'm beautiful and capable of being the best me I can. And I love myself just the way I am. And so that's what they grew up with. And so they flourished and they blossomed. So yeah, that's what I would like to say.
Hey, Meryl, can I call you Auntie Meryl? Because that's how I was raised.
That's fine. You can call me Auntie Meryl. I'm pretty old.
No, you call your elders and those that you respect Auntie. So the question I want to ask is, what can you say in terms of speaking to like how your mom collaborated with the parent community? And I know Dr. Ayize talked about that a lot. but how much role did collaboration with the parents like sort of inform how she practiced Montessori and how it was practiced, or how you practiced it, you know, in terms of, yeah, in communicating with parents and sort of really seeing what those needs of that individual child are?
Well, she, first of all, when she started the school, the parents felt so free around her that they formed their own parent group, which is still today called PAG, Parent Activity Group. That's what they named it, and that continues today within the school. And so she would have, when she did her parent-teachers conferences, the parent came into the school and observed the child before she even conferenced with them. And one of the parents who actually his son went to the school, and his son wrote a book, mentioned her in his book. He said that, you know, when mom interviewed them at the school, she would send the child into the classroom to be with the other children, and she would just have a conversation with the parent. So the child is in the classroom, the parent can observe the child in the classroom as well, and she's interviewing the parent, having a conversation with them in order to admit them into the school. And so she's learning about that child as well. And, you know, of course, observation is a huge part of Montessori, so she would take notes, and she knew about each child and what to tell the parents, because she was definitely involved with each child per se, as it says, you know. And so she related to them in a very warm and embracing way, the children and the parents. So the parents felt extremely, extremely comfortable with her, and you know, embraced her immensely. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question fully, but so that's, yeah.
And if I could add, we are blessed to hear from, you know, Sister Merrill is a graduate of Champ herself. So she's a Montessorian who went through, so you look at the connections, Rosalind Williams' program that was set up, and she studied under Dr. Merlina Barron. And so again, just to see these connections between these, you know, luminary Black Montessorians is phenomenal.
Yeah. And there's a Miss Sylvia too that Amelia is mentioning in the chat. Would she be willing to contribute as well to this idea of culturally responsive Montessori? And what we're talking about is that you're serving a particular community, and so you're, just as Auntie Merrill was saying, this idea of, you know, looking at the individual child, the individual families and what they need, and working in collaboration with their families. So is Sylvia available or willing to contribute anything there? I'm sure she has much to contribute, but at this time, can we call upon her if she's available?
I don't know if I still see her. I saw her earlier, but I'm not sure if I still see her.
So if she is not here, Amelia, would you be willing to speak on culture? Because you are in the process right now, right, of creating this Afrocentric Montessori experience, which I think really is the definition of culturally responsive Montessori. So would you be willing to give us some ideas about what that means and how you're sort of, not only in terms of culturally responsive, but also that idea of cultural empowerment. So you're not just responding culturally to folk, but you are also empowering them through that response. Is she there?
Yes, I'm here. I respectfully wanted to just make sure that the elders were amplified in this space, because when you talk about research in this way, and excuse all of my kids in the background, but when you talk about scholarly work in this way, sometimes that doesn't include, you know, Montessorians. It doesn't include the people that are on the ground that are experiencing. Give me a second. But what I will say is that, you know, I would talk about what Merrill was saying around being able to affirm, you know, like what for me, like going beyond this pedagogy is being culturally affirming to children and their experiences, understanding where they come from. And just like what she was talking about, like really valuing family voice and what that means, and what community means, and reimagining what community means in this space. So I don't have much to say because I'm here to listen. I'm here to listen, and just Jack Merrill is up here, and listen here for a little bit.
And I will say, you know, all of you that are on the call right now, if you weren't paying attention to the chat, I want to bring to everyone's attention, just again, as somebody that is a representative of MSJ, that in the chat, what occurred is that Dr. Mira was asked to give space to folk and elders who are engaged in this work. You know, if you noticed when I asked her the question, that her response was to give them space, which is such a, you know, and I don't mean to embarrass you, Dr. Mira, but, you know, such an exemplary way to respond when asked to give space to those voices that are really at the center of the work. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for teaching us that lesson. Moving on, and again, like I said, I'm going to ask these questions of Dr. Mira and Dr. Ayize and Dr. Luz, Angela, and if you want to defer to someone that is on the call that you think would be better equipped to answer that question, then please do so. One of the things, though, again, we're talking about—
1 second before I jump in. I know there's been a request that if Jackie Miller would like to speak, or Lucy on behalf of Juliet, Juliet is also a Black Montessori elder. Lucy is also an elder in Montessori. They are on the call. I know that there is someone on the call also who's coming in from, I believe, Gambia. I'm sorry. I'm trying, the chat is going so fast, I'm trying to scroll back. So we do have people that are here that are on the ground. And I just want to, I think at this point, if you have questions specifically for the researchers, you can drop them in the chat and we will get them to them. And I think we can use this space for the people who are on the call who are elders who don't get the time to speak much.
Yes, and we will do that, but I do want to, before we, and that is, we will absolutely offer space for that. So before we do that though, I do want to make sure that as a moderator, I do have the responsibility to make sure that this call is contextualized regarding what the purpose, the ultimate purpose of it is. And so what we'll do is let's do that really quick, and then we can give it over to our elders and they can speak to some of the research that's been done. So Dr. Luz had talked about this idea of a Freirean dialogue. Again, that was one of those terms that I had to Google, right? Paulo Freire, and this idea of creating praxis and pedagogy through dialogue. And so these calls, this call is the first of many series of calls where academic research will be presented. But the name of this is From the Ivory Tower to the Streets. And the reason is because there is in the idea of research and the idea of academia, there is a sense of colonialism, right? Born out of that Enlightenment idea of what I see, what I experience, the numbers, the data, that's what the truth is. But as we know from Dr. Ayize's lovely storytelling, that data and numbers are not just the story. In fact, if that were the case, then all of these in fact, these elders that are on the call right now would have been missed. And when their contribution is far greater in many ways, right, than what the data and numbers, the story that the data and numbers would tell. And so I do just want to throw that out there. And so the idea is that as participants in this call, you don't have to have a PhD to have ideas, right? That's kind of what we're going for. You don't have to have a PhD or do lots of data number crunching to be able to participate in finding out these stories. Somebody mentioned coral reef, right, in Miami. So that story needs to be told. It needs to be written down, right, so that we can hear that story. And certainly we can have what we want to hear right now. We want to hear the conversations, but it doesn't have to be Dr. Page, Dr. Ayize, or Dr. Luz that writes that story down. It can be me, and it could be any of you that writes that story down. And so I do want to go ahead and make sure that that's, you know, that's clear, that there's clarity of purpose of why we're meeting here today. But again, I think that I 100% agree with Deanne that we need to make space for the stories we can't just tell stories about the folk. If they're here, that doesn't make any sense. They're here right now, so let's hear from them. So with that said, are there specifics that in terms of what wants questions, or do we have questions from the chat? I haven't been taking. I'm not good enough to keep up with the chat.
No, I think we wanted to definitely see if Sister Jackie Miller wanted to say anything. And I know there was another Sister Luce that might want to say something about Juliet King.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So let's talk to them and talk about, again, I think that we could even center on this idea of culturally responsive being moved into cultural empowerment, as Amelia said, affirming Black and brown children, Black, Indigenous people of color through Montessori, and maybe how these elders and these folks who have currently and have practiced it sort of have done that. And also with that idea of collaboration too, because it can apply too, right, to the administrator and the parent. Just like we're talking about the academic and the teacher, there is that idea too of how do you collaborate with the parents. So maybe we can hear from them in that framework, if that is okay with everyone. Does that sound like or they can say whatever they want to, because there are elders. They can also do that too. That's fine. So, Ms. Miller, are you on the call still? Jackie, are you still on the call?
I am here. Yes, I am here. Thank you all. Oh my God, I love you all so much. I was chatting like, no, I'm here to listen today. But I will say that this is so, woo, you know me. Those of you who know me, you know me. I get emotional real fast. This is so amazing and empowering and heartwarming and ooh, like I continue to be. I'm in this in-between space. I'm an elder, but I'm still very active in this work. And I just keep looking for what is mine to do next. And being in collaboration and in this space and in this time where we are connecting and hearing and lifting up, it just makes me so excited about the pace at which we can affect change. And I'll just, a quick word about culturally responsive, like Gloria Ladson-Billings said, all teaching is culturally responsive. It's just which culture are we responding to? And to be in a space where we can lift up Montessori and acknowledge that it is responding very well to a particular cultural expression, and let's look at other necessary cultural expressions and let's just expand and grow this work from a place of love and commitment and faith in Montessori to just continue to grow and amplify this work. And the scholarly work that's happening, the research is so important. And I'm a novice in that. So hopefully I have a lot of years left to go because I keep learning and I'm just eager to continue to contribute. So thank you. Let's do this for our kids. So worthy.
Thank you, Jackie. Lucy, is there anything you would like to say on behalf of you and or Juliet, or you all looking to be like, no, I don't want to talk. You are muted, Paige, if you could unmute Lucy. Just give us a couple of seconds. We are working through getting that unmuted so we can hear from one of our elders.
Hey, while you all are working on that, I also was remiss in my opening that I did not even lift up a word of thanks to Brother Philando Castillo, who, on this day, had his life force snuffed out from him. And even yesterday was Alton Sterling, life force snuffed out. So, please remember them also.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Juliet and I are not very tech savvy, so we had some obstacles, but she definitely sends her love to everyone. And you know, just today we submitted our last chapter for our dissertation on culturally responsive pedagogy and CRP and ABAR in 3 public Montessori schools, right, including ours. It has been a love of labor. We have learned so much. I'm very honored to be mentored by Juliet, who is an elder, who is a pioneer, who's been in education since 1969, who is very much a human rights activist, you know, did voter registration in the early 60s from South Carolina. So I really want to center the conversation again back to the work that we have to do is really so important now more than ever, because this whole bombardment of anti-Blackness is so prevalent in everything that we do, in research, in our classrooms, in our schools, in everything. And it really shows the, you know, the necessity for especially researchers of color and to really kind of mentor the next generation, to really tell our stories and to really, you know, also learn from our mistakes, because, you know, we're all, those of us who are in systems of public education, you know, we are all subjected to white supremacy every day. So it's how do we navigate and work around that and, you know, do our own work, but also amplify the voices of our students and really bring hope, right? So that's what we're hoping, that our work, you know, is encouraging and really, really, once again, reaffirms the necessity to really, the urgency, if you will, the life and death urgency, if you will, you know, to really have schools that are really committed to fighting anti-Blackness in this country. So we hope that, you know, you guys will see this work soon and you'll be inspired by it, and we might shed some tears together, and we might you know, have some smiles and laughs together too. So thank you, and Juliet sends her love.
May I, Lucy, may I, and if you're not up to answering this, that's fine, but may I ask you, like, as you, certainly there's your lived experience, of course, as a Black woman in the United States of America, but in terms of understanding the needs of your community, that you serve the children and their parents, when, like, again, what I was talking about is we're talking about this idea of reframing the word research, right? Whereas there's academic context of research, but then, like, as teachers, particularly if we're Black, Indigenous people of color, we're constantly researching because we got to look around and watch our society all the time and see what does my community need to feel safe, and so sort of what are some of the things, are there particular things that you did to interact with your community, or is it just that lived experience of just being with the students?
I mean, I think that, you know, that when Juliet and I started the school, you know, we're in Miami, so we're in a predominantly Latinx community. And as a Latinx person, you know, of both Indigenous and European background, we have a tremendous amount of work to do in dismantling white supremacy and the whole erasure of due to colonialism. So we you know, we're constantly dealing with that. And then, you know, having the privilege of being mentored by a Black elder, a Black woman, Juliet King, has really been an incredible discovery of who we are as women and women of color, and, you know, supporting one another in this work and really trying to support our children, right? So I think that it's a very tricky thing, right? You know, to do research because it is very much a part of the system, but it's also needed because we need to be able to tell our stories rather than have somebody else tell them. I think that, again, a lot of the things that we know, you know, really stem from ancient wisdom, right? And Corinne Clark has shared some of the work of the former Asa, I forget his last name, the Professor Asa Hillard, right? And talking about a lot of these traditions that date back from Africa, right? The Kemet cultures that really show, that really counter attack the narrative that there's a weakness in the Black family and there's a weakness in the brown family and all this bullshit, excuse my French, but that's what it is. So, you know, it's really kind of, again, knowing that even when we're talking about research, we're going to be somewhat limited to how we tell that story because we are working within a system. So it's really being able to kind of look at what we're saying and say, yes, okay, we know that there's still these opportunity gaps, but besides those things, what are we doing right and what can we do better, right? So I think that this is what this research these past 3 years have told us. Nobody's really ready to pat their heads, you know, pat ourselves on the back. None of us are, because we live in a very racist society. So, but I think we should pat ourselves in the back because we're all here, right? We're all present and we're all saying we're going to do it no matter what. So it's kind of like we're doing the tango, right? We're going back and forth, but I think ultimately we're plowing through and we're creating something for future generations. That is the hope, that is the prayer.
Thank you so much. And I apologize for that misidentification earlier.
That's okay. That's an honor. In my past life, maybe.
Deanna, is there anybody else that, since you've been monitoring the chat, that we should hear from?
I'm scrolling through. There's been a lot of really fruitful conversations in the chat, so it's been a little.
I don't know. Want to let Sister Tricia say anything about the great work she's doing with KCLC?
Yeah, talk about culturally responsive. Absolutely. Let's do that.
Good evening, everybody. I don't want to, thank you, Dr. Ayize. I don't want to, you know, I'm here to listen and support my Black brothers and sisters. And I want to just say thank you for sharing and the opportunity to learn. Thank you, Paige. I just do want to amplify the aunties, Lucy and Juliet. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with our native language symposium, but it's every November, and so we had to postpone it because of COVID. So now we're postponing it to April, the third week in April of 2021, and if we can't do it then it'll come hopefully the next November. But our focus was already on anti-bias and anti-racism even before it became trendy to do. So who we have on our social justice, the schools panel is, we invited Coral Reef School, but there's also the Pear Tree School, which is a social justice focused Montessori school in Oakland, and then we have other schools along with those schools. But our keynote speakers are going to be one of our own, the Black biracial Tiffany Jewell, and then Wilhelmina Yazzie, who was the key plaintiff in the Yazzie Martinez versus State of New Mexico, and Duta Flying Earth, who is the principal of Native American Community Academy. But one thing I do want to say, and thank you for giving me a chance to say something, is that we really need to frame everything that we do, and it has to be about solidarity. And Michelle Hamilton, who is the founder of Pear Tree, she talks about solidarity and oppression, and always to remember that solidarity is power with. And so how do we disrupt who has power and the power dynamics that do occur within the Montessori community, and bring that special focus back to BIPOC children? Because when we center Black, Indigenous, and children of color, then white children are going to get taken care of. You know, they're going to, and right now when 82%, 90% of Montessori teachers are white, and when we think about who comes to mind, I don't know that it's always a Black child that comes to mind. So we really need to think about what frameworks we're talking about all of this stuff in, and for who and for what gaze. But I really want to thank Dr. Ayize, Dr. Mira, and Dr. Luce and Dr. Murry. Thank you for sharing this space and listening to what was in the chat box. Thank you, Dr. Page. Nitra.
Thank you so much. I think that we're closing in on time, and I see lots of great questions in the chat, and I believe that what we're going to do is save that chat and send it to our panelists, and they're going to go through it. And if they're and of course, I assume the slide presentations are going to be sent out as well. That has the contact information, and so you can certainly email our panelists individually as well. I also want to give a shout out to Yvonne, who's an MSG board member, who's done great work in Wampanoag people as well. Thank you for being here. Your efforts, as well as Trisha's, have been life-changing for me in terms of opening up my awareness in terms of the idea of solidarity and acknowledging that which has always ever been present in North America. So we are going, or on Turtle Island, excuse me. See, I'm always learning as well. I also, again, want to acknowledge everyone who's spoken today and the grace with which they've spoken and allowed one another has been so humble towards one another. I think that when I look at this group and the way that we interact, despite everything that is going on around us, I feel incredibly hopeful. Because it really does take just a few people with this kind of energy to affect great change, right? I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Page to wrap up and talk to you about the survey. But again, as we sort of ran out of time, there were lots of other things that we wanted to talk to. But again, I want to go back to what Dr. Luce, Dr. Ayize, Dr. Mira and Dr. Page, as they conceived of this idea that research is not limited to the ivory tower, but that indeed our lived experiences can much to the development of practice as well as the movement of social justice as it moves. So